Morning. On behalf of the Center for the Study of Ethics, I would like to welcome you to our 30th annual Ethics Awareness Week. My name is Brian Birch, and I'm the director of the center here on campus, and I just want to publicly thank everyone who's involved in putting these events together. I want to thank the staff of the Center for the Study of Ethics, our faculty advisory board, and colleagues from across campus who've connected students to what we're going to be doing over the course of the next week. So between now and next Friday, we're going to host 17 sessions focused around the theme of ethics in global contexts. And so we're going to have lectures and panel discussions and workshops and other activities that connect students to issues across cultures, across countries, and we hope you enjoy being part of this. So I just want to call your attention to a couple of things. You'll see on the backs of the chairs, that's our assessment form. So if you could do, it's a QR code, after the session is over, if you want to take a minute just to answer 5 very quick questions about the event. We certainly value your feedback and want to keep improving our programming. If you want to know what's happening for the rest of the week, outside on the easel board poster is another QR code, and that takes you directly to the web page where the full schedule is. So we hope you can connect with us. Today we have 2 keynote addresses. One this morning with our friend Felipe Queipo from the United Nations, who will be introduced by Baldomero Lago. And then we have another lecture this afternoon in partnership with the Department of Philosophy and Humanities, where we're hosting Dr. Martha Nussbaum, who will be lecturing on animal justice issues. So if you're interested in that, it'll be in this room at 2:30. So at this point, I'd like to turn the time over to Baldomero Lago, who is the Chief International Officer here at UVU, to introduce our lecture for this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. It's a privilege to be with you, folks. Good morning to everyone. As indicated, I'm Baldomero Lago. I'm the Chief International Officer here at UVU. And one of our responsibilities, and I'm just going to have Keiko, if you're more than welcome to come. There's a little issue that needs to happen here in preparation for Felipe's presentation, so it's just a technical thing. So I'm going to move out so Keiko can use the podium. Again, it's an honor to be with you and a privilege, and we are so excited to welcome again to this beautiful campus Mr. Felipe Queipo, who happens to be a United Nations official or officer in the Department of Global Communications. It used to be known as the Department of Public Information, DPI. And they changed things, and he'll probably be able to explain to you a little bit about some of the transitions and changes that have taken place recently at the UN. UVU became affiliated to the United Nations officially in 2017, and it was primarily thanks to the great effort of this good man, Felipe Queipo. He was able to bring us on board. And then just a couple of years later, we were able to become an affiliate or an associated to the Department of United Nations Academic Impact, better say, rather than department. So we work with civil society and as an academic or institution, as well as through the Academic Impact Unit. Thanks to this partnership, in 2018, we were able to plan, well, actually 17 to 18, we were able to plan the 68th Civil Society Conference in Salt Lake City that took place in August of 2019. That was the very first time the United Nations actually held a conference outside New York headquarters in their 75 years of history. For the first time ever, the UN left New York headquarters and came to Salt Lake City. And they brought the whole entourage, securities, the President of the General Assembly, everyone some very high-profile individuals came to Salt Lake City, where more than 6,000 people attended from 140 nations. They all came here to Salt Lake City. And that happened thanks to the collaboration of Utah Valley University and the mayor of Salt Lake City, Jackie Biskupski, at that time, under the umbrella of Mr. Felipe Queipo and his team in New York. So he was pivotal, and he was incredible to be able to do that. And then last October, we brought the United Nations again to, not at that scope, but under the first International Academic Conference on the Sustainable Development Goals. This time we had less audience, over 2,000 individuals from 40 different nations. And that happened here on campus at UVU. So we promote the 2030 Global Agenda, which is the Sustainable Development Goals Agenda, the 17 goals. And we celebrate every month a UN Day, which is recently this week is the International Day of Peace. So Mr. Queipo actually spoke yesterday in Dr. Lynn England's class on peace. But anyhow, just to give you kind of a preamble as to why the UN at UVU. We are the only, and Felipe probably mentioned that, we are the only academic institution in the state of Utah that is affiliated to the UN. So we do and we promote and we work closely on those projects. Now, let's talk about my friend Felipe. Again, he is like another staff or another fellow now at UVU because he has come often and he comes periodically. And when I knew that he was going to come, I mentioned to Dr. Birch that he was going to be here on campus. If he would be more than happy to speak with all of you. Felipe was born and raised in Madrid, Spain. And he has actually lived extensively in Switzerland and in other places. And I'm originally also from Spain, so that we already have that interconnection. But I actually got to know Felipe in 2000, I believe it was 17, that we met in New York, the first time that I was working with the UN, and that's when I met him through another friend. So Felipe has been at the United Nations for the past 15 years as a communications officer. He's a member of the Speakers Bureau. That means that he is assigned to travel to many different places around the world to speak on behalf of the UN. So he was just a couple of weeks ago in Thailand, and he's heading back again to Asia and then to Africa, and he's all over the world representing the United Nations. So that's a job and a half. I don't envy him, but because that's a lot of traveling. Felipe graduated from Brigham Young University, Idaho, but he also studied at the University of St. Louis in Madrid. And so another university in Madrid, that was, yes, on the Autonomous University in Madrid. He's also the faith-based, let me see if I say this correctly, faith-based focal point for the United Nations. So one of his roles is also to dialogue with multiple different faiths, religions. So he's working constantly on bringing conversation, dialogue, interfaith, peace, and through his communications. Above all, Felipe is a great guy to get to know. I mean, he has so much experience. He's a world traveler, and so he has done wonderful work for the UN. He won't tell you this, but Felipe is the key element at the United Nations. He writes the speeches for most of the top-notch individuals at the UN. And when I say top-notch, Undersecretary Generals, the big boss, they always call Felipe, I need some bullet points. Can you write my message? Can you do this? So he is the man behind the scenes. So it's such a privilege for us to have him here on campus. How are we coming with audio? Yeah. You just need, great, you need power. Yes, because he's going to introduce the message by using a video, and we need the audio to be able to do this. So what else? We have worked hundreds or thousands of hours together, especially for the Why Matters conference last year. That was such a huge event. Let me tell you about the Why Matters just briefly. It was the very first conference. There's going to be a second conference in June next year in Bilbao, Spain, but June or May, probably May. But it was the very first time that we were able to call for papers. We received over 200, almost 300 papers. Those papers were peer-reviewed by multiple universities throughout the world, and 78 of them were selected for publication. And UVU was able to publish those 78 articles, which actually I think maybe 3 or 4 came from students and faculty from UVU, which we thought was fantastic. The publication is over 1,600 pages, 2 volumes. And that publication, of course, we have one copy down here, well, next to us in the library, but also at the United Nations, we did an official presentation of the publication to the UN with over 40 UVU students that actually attended CSW, the Commission Center for Women, and last March. So yes, UVU is well known at the UN. I just want you to know that, and he can attest to that. But I believe that we are ready to go. Well, folks, thank you for your patience. Thank you, Cacao, for helping us. And without further ado, here's Mr. Felipe Queipo. Thank you.
I pay him well, huh? Thank you for having me. It's a real honor. My background is in political science and theology and other things that Valdemar has spoken about. I'm the focal point for faith-based engagement, and I'm the manager of the engagement with civil society at large at the UN with the Department of Global Communication. So we have a specific mandate, which is let's work together with other entities outside of the United Nations to advance the agenda that we have. And our agenda is not to take away rights from anyone. Let's demystify things. We have one of the main challenges that the UN faces is, well, they're trying to, I don't know, bring communism or socialism or just like take away rights and impose a one world order. Nothing further from the truth. We were created in 1945 for a specific reason, not to repeat the same mistakes that led us to a global conflict. And so far, we've done okay. We have challenges today, as you know, globally, regionally, but also ones that impact the global economy, which is something that people really feel passionate about, and also human rights. Let me show you a video to introduce a little bit the UN to you very briefly. It's only 2 minutes. And then I'll just share with you some thoughts.
After the genocide and destruction of the Second World War, a new global organization was founded. Enshrined in its charter was the fact that all people are equal and entitled to the same respect, justice, and human rights. It is a place where people from all races, religions, and beliefs work together and speak out for us all.
Today is the day of every woman who have raised their voice for their rights.
It is a place that brings nations together to strive for peace. And it's the last best hope we have in the battle to save the planet.
The world is waking up, and change is coming.
It has agreed goals to shape the future of the world. To end poverty and hunger, address inequality, protect our planet, and build a life of dignity for all. It's the light in the darkness. Where there is conflict, where there is injustice, where there is poverty, where there is hunger, there is help on the way. And you will see this sign. The United Nations. The nations of the world working together to defeat the problems of the world.
So, this was us. That's it. That's the message today. Sorry, and the microphone. We have a very bad reputation in many places. People think that we are useless. People think that we are a waste of money, that we should be defunded, that member states should really pull out of it. The reality is that once you get to know the work that we do, once you get to collaborate with us, you really see that we are there to do good. And we partner with really, really good entities all over the world. We are the lead entity. If there's one thing that the UN has, is convening power. We can bring people together, and that is the main mandate that we have. We want people to talk with each other. We want people to really advance good agendas. Agenda 2030 with the 7 Sustainable Development Goals is just the result of years of collaboration and engagement and consultation. 10 million people contributed to the agenda to see, okay, what is that we need to do in the world to make it a better place for everyone. And I always talk about the same thing. We have a moral imperative. This is Ethics Week, right? So we have a moral imperative, an ethical imperative, if you wish, to provide the world with the tools necessary to advance, to grow, to become stronger, and to provide for everyone. I'm LDS. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And in our faith tradition, we talk about eternal happiness. And I was saying this yesterday. And we talk about how we hope to, again, have an eternal way. There's a plan of happiness, plan of salvation. And that's nice. And that's cool. But what about here? What do we do when people are struggling here? They're not of our faith. They're not of any faith. They're different faiths. I believe that the promise I get through my faith tradition, and many other faith traditions also offer to their followers, is nice. But we at the UN, we're in the business of making that happiness sustainable, and that sustainable happiness accessible to everyone, whatever that looks like. Sometimes all you need is to have, I don't know, in a remote village, a goat, so that you can have some milk, so you can make some cheese, so you can exchange for other produce, so you can feed your family. Something as simple as that. And a family with a goat will be one that will be content and will be happy. Happiness is very different in different places of the world. The idea is, how do we ensure that they have those tools or access to the resources so that they can provide for themselves without depending on foreign aid, on external aid? Is something that we call sustainable development. The LDS Church calls it self-reliance. Okay, we talk about the same thing. Different names for the same concept. We talk about climate change. Well, the LDS Church talks about environmental stewardship or earth stewardship. And as a matter of, as a communications officer, translating to a language that is understood by everyone, what we mean. And the UN jargon is sometimes complex. The UN is a complex structure. It's not a monolithic structure. We have different organs with different purposes: Security Council, General Assembly, Court of Justice. How do we ensure that people understand who we are and what we do? Because the main challenge that we face is people don't know who we are. Therefore, we don't have much support at the UN. And our moral imperative is to ensure that we can provide for everyone and that we collaborate. We collaborate with UVU, for example, is the only academic institution in the state of Utah with a formal affiliation with the United Nations. And that came as a result of the Office for Global Engagement and Valdemar Lago. We met in New York for an event. He said, "Oh, you're from Spain, you work for the UN, and you work with civil society. Why don't you come and talk to my students?" And the students said, "On campus." Out of that came a relationship that evolved to a formal affiliation through two mechanisms: the academic impact of the United Nations and also the Department of Global Communications through the civil society unit. And with that, we built a civil society conference with the mayor's office, the support of the governor's office also, the legislature. The state legislature was very supportive, and they were very welcoming of the UN. And then we started breaking barriers, thinking like, okay, the UN is not that bad. We have a lot in common, and we're working and partnering together. And that is the idea, is that by working together, we can make a difference. The world in 1945, when the UN was created, it was a very different place. We had a Second World War, we had a global conflict that had created a division in the world between good guys and bad guys, or the victors and the losers. And of course, people did horrible things. We talk about the Holocaust, for example, in Germany and Europe. 2023 is not the same world. It's a very different, 7 years later, we're dealing with different challenges. Although we have geopolitical challenges today, most of the challenges we face are ideological. And you do not fight ideas with military intervention or bombing or resolutions or sanctions, and as education, communication, and diplomacy. Those are the three pillars of the UN today. For me, as a communications officer, my role is to ensure that people have access to good information, quality information, verified information, not the challenges that we're facing with misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech, propaganda. what Russia is doing right now against Ukraine, an illegal invasion, breaking international law, all the mechanisms that we have against the UN Charter, and the provision of the rights of the Ukrainian people to have a sovereign state, which they have, and they should be protected against that. What Russia is doing is illegal. And the UN has been very clear about it, and our Secretary General has been very clear about it. You cannot do that, of course. How much power does the UN to prevent that from happening? We are an instrument in the hands of 193 member states. So we don't have an autonomous power. We don't have authority to do anything unless those 193 member states allow us to act and allow us to take action in some places. So if we need to pass a resolution, it has to be by consensus or by vote. And of course, when the Security Council meets, and Russia is one of the 5 countries that has a veto power, the US, the UK, Russia, China, and France have that veto power, they can say, yeah, we don't want to talk about that. And that's the end of the discussion in the Security Council. That's how the UN was designed. It's one of the flaws that we have. But the UN is much more than the Security Council. The Security Council is one of the organs that responsible for peace and security. It has its issues. It's been really good in preventing conflict and addressing conflict in many places. But it is not a perfect organization, and it's not a perfect organ of the UN because it has the limitations that member states impose on us. So we have other mechanisms, the General Assembly, as I said, the Economic and Social Council that deal with different issues. Our role in the Department of Global Communications is to engage with external partners, facilitate the participation of civil society or any entity that is not part of the government, and have their voices included in the conversations at the UN. And that includes UVU as an informal entity, Latter-day Saint Charities, Islamic Relief, Caritas from the Catholic Church. Around 60% of the active civil society or NGOs that work with the UN are faith-based or faith-inspired. There's a faith component behind. Arigato International is a Japanese entity that is a faith-based and faith-inspired organization, and they move through the UN channels to advocate for children's rights. They work with UNICEF, and they have great publications. So we work in those areas to see how we can really emphasize the importance and relevance of this. How does ethics or morality or faith involved at the UN? Where for the last, I would say, 15 years, since I joined the UN, things have changed a lot. Before, we did not talk much about faith engagement or collaboration with faith-based organizations. We say, yeah, that is iffy. It's a subject that is like complicated and complex to talk about because we don't want to be perceived as favoring one over the other. We don't want people to think that we're here to preach or to convert, to proselytize, but it is necessary to engage with those actors that are moving societies to do good all over the world. And in that sense, we found mechanisms of, consultation, collaboration. My office, the Department of Global Communications, in the civil society unit, we have a section called the NGLS, the Non-Governmental Liaison Service, and our job is to ensure that civil society organizations can be part of the conversation at the UN at the high levels. And it works. And we have consultations with outcome documents that result in action in changing policies globally. The SDGs and the Sustainable Development Goals consultation, as I said, of 10 million people that took like 3 years to come up with, is now the roadmap that we're using moving forward. And the last document that we have issued at the United Nations is called OCA, Our Common Agenda, is the vision of our Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, for the next 25 years of the United Nations, what he calls the UN 2.0. How can we really be the UN that the world needs? How can we become more relevant? And how can we correct issues? We're not perfect. As I said, we've made mistakes, big mistakes in some cases. We have learned from those mistakes and we keep advancing. But we have a motto at the UN, which is leave no one behind. And we really believe in that. We believe that leave no one person behind is key for the work that we have to do and is fundamental in our mission. So if we work together, if we collaborate with the right entities, if we collaborate with academic institutions and have presentations like this and others, we believe that we can then advance much more because we can be known a little bit more. And we can demystify certain things of what we can and cannot do and what is our mission and whatnot. I'm not going to continue talking and bore you to death. I want this to be a little bit dynamic or interactive. I hope that you participate and you ask questions. But this is your time. I don't know if you have any questions about anything on the UN, on the work that we do, on our engagement, on UVU and the UN or anything, or our work with faith-based. I mean, there's a microphone over there, so you can just raise your hand and ask. Please ask questions. It's awful when speakers ask for questions like silence. It's like, no, I'm not interested. I'm just here because I have to. Go ahead.
things that the UN actually has done to benefit us as a community. We're talking about FAA, we talk about communications with the
So the UN is very, so I can explain something and you may think, you see, the one world order thing we're talking about. How many of you have a smartphone? How do smartphones work? What do they need up there to work? Satellites. Who do you think determines the orbits of the satellites globally? The question coming from me, the answer is going to be very simple, right? So it's not the UN, but it's one of the entities of the UN, the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union of the United Nations, is based in Geneva. And what they do is member states that belong to the ITU come together and determine the safety of satellites in orbit, the orbits and the frequency of communication. So that is something that the UN coordinates and we facilitate. Your passports. You have biometrics in your passports, and when you take a plane and you fly from one country to the other, the safety of the planes, but also the routes that you take when you fly. That is the ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization of the United Nations in Montreal, Canada. Member states, all the countries come together and they coordinate. Coordination, as I said, convening and bringing people together is something that we do very well at the UN. We can ask people to come to the table. They may disagree. They may fight and argue, but we bring them to the table, and that's already 80% of the success. And then they come up with solution to global challenges. And as I said, planes, passports, cell phones, and many other things. Labor rights is ILO, the International Labour Organization of the United Nations also, which precedes the UN. In fact, it was part of the League of Nations and before. Determines that 40 hours a week is the maximum and that certain labor rights that people have globally and so on. So the UN really has influence and benefited people all over the world, developed countries and developing countries, economies in transition and what we call the global north equally. And sometimes in my neighborhood, I live in Harlem, in New York City. And my neighbor said, yeah, but what is the UN doing for me? I said, well, how long do you have? Because I can talk forever and tell you how much the UN has done and continues doing for you. But the idea is, we're here to help. We are here to collaborate. The reason why the US is the host of the UN is because the US saw the potential that a global organization like the UN could have globally. And we have seen how, with refugee, for example, resettlement, but also refugee protection of rights, the protection of human rights globally through the Human Rights Council and so on, how much we can really benefit communities and we can provide for those that are in need and leave no one behind. Those are some of the things we've done. For Utah, when we had the Civil Society Conference in 2019, we demystified some things. We were able to eliminate some misconceptions, and that was really good. But we collaborated very strongly with different actors, so much so that ever since, for example, the LDS Church donated last year a check with $32 million to the UN World Food Program for people who were in need and needed food in refugee camps and other programs. The church said, what do you need? Here we go. The year before, $21 million to COVAX, the COVID-19 initiative of the United Nations. We have a good partnership with many faith-based organizations. LDS Church works with Islamic Relief. We also work with them. And Caritas International is from the Catholic Church, and we work very well with them. And what we do is, okay, where are we needed? What can we do? What do you need? Money? Okay, we can do that. So those organizations provide the UN with the necessary resources so that we can then deploy them on the ground, which we are really good at. We have clusters, and we have chiefs of clusters, and we have country operations. So we are really involved globally in all countries, not only in developing countries and economies in transition, but also in developed countries and nations like the US, for example, or Spain, my country. No questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
I was just wondering, how do you become a member state of the UN?
The process is you have to be recognized nationally by the General Assembly. You need to apply and request the General Assembly and the Office of the President of the General Assembly to be recognized. You need to meet certain criteria. The last country to join the UN was South Sudan in 2011, when it became independent from Sudan. And it met the criteria. The international community acknowledged that they had their own economy, that they had their own independence. So the General Assembly will vote and will accept a new member to the UN as a full member. We currently have 193 member states last one, South Sudan, with 2 observers, which is the Vatican and the occupied territories of Palestine. So Palestine and the Vatican are observer members to the UN, don't have full membership. The Vatican doesn't want it. Palestine wants it to be recognized as an independent state. And the UN is working towards brokering a deal so that we can have a 2-state solution in the region. So we have Israel and Palestine fully recognize both of them. Right now, only Israel is.
So you mentioned that certain countries have veto power in the UN. To what extent do these countries have more power than, say, smaller countries in the UN?
In the General Assembly, every country there's no veto. So the General Assembly and the resolutions are one country, one vote, independent on your GDP, your population, whatnot. The Security Council has veto power for 5. There's 15 member states, 10 of them rotate, 5 every year, so they serve for 2 years. And then there's 5 permanent members, the US, the UK, Russia, China, and France, that were the victors of the Second World War, and they were friends and very friendly with each other back in the day, 1945. 2023 is a little bit different, and we have some challenges there. And the problem we have is that the UN Charter, like the Constitution of the United Nations, was drafted in such a way that it shielded or protected the veto power of those 5 member states. I think that the lack of vision on the part of the original leaders of the world made them think that the world would be the same for a long time and it would be okay and people would behave in an expected manner given what had happened with a world conflict. And politics have taken place and the world has evolved in a very different direction that they originally intended. So the UN Charter does not provide for a mechanism to reform the Security Council veto mechanism unless the 5 permanent members voluntarily give it up. They say, yeah, I don't want to have all the power that the Security Council has. I give it up for the well-being of the planet. Not happening. Not anytime soon. We hope that one day will happen. There's a movement for the reform of the Security Council. There's a movement to expand it to all 50 member states instead of just 5. But still, to think that the peace and security of the world is in the hands of only 5 member states is not very democratic when you have many more member states that are impacted by the decisions made by those 5 and others. Right now, the situation in Ukraine, Russia is the aggressor in this case. So what happens is every time the Security Council has to deal with the issue, Russia will veto it and say, yeah, we don't talk about that, we're not going to pass a resolution and whatnot. Conversations take place. At least Ukraine is invited to the table and is heard. But right now, we heard what President Zelensky was. This week is the high-level week at the UN, by the way. I was able to escape, I don't know how. It was a miracle. First time in 15 years that I was allowed to, I need to leave New York City because it's chaotic, because all heads of state, government are coming, and everyone's like, I can leave, and my boss likes me enough to say, you know what, you deserve it, go away. Everyone is asking me, how do you do it? Who do you bribe and who do you know? Because this is not, because you're supposed to be here. I know. So I'm still connected. I'm plugged on my phone and things are happening and I had to attend those matters. But this is the high-level week. President Zelensky was there, President Biden was there. He was very clear about the aggression. But for the first time in a long time, 4 members of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council didn't send their principals. Russia, China, the United Kingdom, and France are not present in the general debate this year. They are through the ministers, but not through the prime ministers. Clear message that something is going on, that things have to change. Some member states will tell you, well, different agendas. The G8 takes place every year at the same time, so it's not like you didn't know what was coming and you have a conflict unless. So it's interesting to see what the justification has been. But when you have those member states with veto power in the Security Council, you face those challenges. What we do is the best that we can with the instrument that we have been given. It's an imperfect instrument, it's okay, but we still advance security and peace globally with peace missions and so on. And we're okay. We struggle to accomplish certain things. Syria has been on the table for a long time, but Russia and China are friendly with Bashar al-Assad, which is the head of the government in Syria, and they have said, yeah, we don't want to repeat the same mistakes that we did in Libya with Muammar Gaddafi. So, yeah, it's a civil conflict, it's an internal conflict, a national sovereign thing. Let them handle it internally. We have the largest crisis of people displaced due to conflict in history. we have almost 100 million people globally displaced due to conflict or climate, because for the first time we have climate refugees. And refugees due to conflict that happen from Venezuela to Colombia, that have gone from Ukraine, elsewhere, from Syria, outside, Iraq, I mean, you name it. There are many countries in the world that are struggling with issues. So the UN tries to provide services for those communities and tell the other member states, could we do something to prevent this before it originates, before it escalates to the point that you need to displace people inside the country and outside the country. An IDP, internally displaced person, is considered just that, an internally displaced person within the boundaries of the country. When they cross borders, we call them refugees. And the legal terminology is important because then the Office of the High Commissioner for Refugees can intervene in the cases of refugees, but for internally displaced people, it's a domestic issue. So it has to be there are many complexities. So we try to deal with governments and we can work together. So how can we solve this before it escalates to a point that is not sustainable? And the same with climate. We have countries like Panama that they had to build a mini city on the coastline because people who settled in an island close by the mainland country, they settled in like 100 years ago. The water levels are rising, so now they know that in a few years it will not be livable. So now they have to make the decision, okay, let's place them, let's move them, let's just transfer them to the mainland so that they can live safely. Many issues.
You have the Sustainable Development Goals there on the screen. We live in a time of, I think, fairly general pessimism about the health and welfare of the world and international relations. Can you tell us anything about the progress that's being made towards the Sustainable Development Goals? So, we were doing very well until the pandemic hit us. And then we were not doing that well. And it's a challenge. So how many of you know about the Sustainable Development Goals, by the way? Not many people. I want to try to, if you can give me 1 minute, let me try to pull them up. Let's see if we can just put an image. There you go. This is the right one. Can we see? Yeah. No, I don't want that. I want the image. Sorry. You are? Let me do this. Let's put it this way. These are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, adopted by the United Nations in 2015, as I said, by a General Assembly resolution. For the future we want. We cover all the areas that we thought were important. It was a consultation with civil society, academia, the private sector, governments, and what made it unique is that consultation really listened to the voices of society, and we said, okay, these are the main goals that we must have to make the world a better place for people, prosperity, and planet. Some of them are very hard to accomplish. And we have to take into consideration the different challenges that culture, religion, history play in the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. And this is an initiative that was kind of on track, not fully on track, but depends heavily on two things. The willingness of member states or countries to really adopt them and make them into an implementable program, and civil society to be able to help and support. So we have universities, for example, that have mapped all the classes in their catalog with the SDGs. So if you're taking a class in health science, you will be doing SDG 3, or if it's energy or water, 6 or 7. 11 is for cities and whatnot. So we have different areas, and this one also targets. We were doing okay, but the pandemic then hit hard, and then we realized that we were not on track to really, we are not on track. In fact, we have gone backwards in some of them, particularly the ones that relate to women. Women's rights and girls' rights and education. We see the situation in Afghanistan, for example, that even though it's not impacted because of COVID, but is impacted because of the political situation in the region and the pull out of certain countries led by the U.S. coalition. For 2 years now, women and girls don't have access to employment and education. So SDG 5, SDG 10, inequalities for people with disabilities are very impacted. I said the motto of the UN is leave no one behind, and these 17 goals impact all of them. 17 is very popular, is again partnerships for the goals. 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions is very important. Strong institutions like UVU, government's office, it can be governmental and non-governmental. But together is how we, again through 17, we try to accomplish them. In the previous 15 years, from 2000 to 2015, we were able to reduce extreme poverty by half. So we advance. And when people ask me, well, if you're not going to be able to achieve them, why bother? And the idea is the same. You're students. You will not always, I mean, I hope you do, but I don't think that everyone will always get an A+ or 100% on the test. You don't just give up. You want a degree. You have an objective. You have a goal. The idea with the UN is the same. Okay, we want to eliminate extreme poverty or just poverty at large. We will not be able to accomplish it fully, 100% probably, ever. I mean, I hope we do, but I don't. But do we stop there just because we will not be 100% perfect in what we do? No. So we continue working with that, and we invite people to work with us. The more allies that we have in working with these goals, the better. You've seen before that there's another slogan before the video that says, keeping the promise. That was after 5 years. So the Agenda 2030 has 15 years, from 2015 to 2030. That's what's called Agenda 2030. After 5 years of promotion and marketing and inserting them in everywhere, we even have commercials that we use on movie theaters about the SDGs and the global goals. We started the Keeping the Promise, the decade of action. The decade of, like the last 10 years, and by the way, this year, we just finished the SDG Summit, which is at the center point of, is the midpoint of the SDGs. We want to implement them. We want everyone to adopt them. Private sector has done a really good job in adopting the SDGs and including them. In fact, nowadays, you find in private companies the CSO role, the Chief Sustainability Officer role. And that is very important for us because they are getting, like, sustainability is the future, and it is. Government, sometimes they have excuses, like, yeah, well, but we need to focus on this and that. What we realize is if you focus on a sustainable solution, then everything goes smoother and better. So we have faced challenges, as I said, with gender inequality, inequities also, people with disabilities, sustainable citizen communities. Pollution is high in some places. We have seen, due to COVID, that you can reduce pollution easily by reducing consumption. So SDG 12, responsible consumption and production, is very important because it puts the onus on both the producer, the company, but also the user. So what are we as consumers doing to ensure that we can protect the planet? It's a very political issue. And that's the other thing. We politicize everything. We talked about this yesterday. And the problem is when you politicize things, you create enemies, or you create sides, the good, the bad, the crazy people that think that the planet is dying and we are destroying it, and the people say, well, that's just pure politics. It's just they want to take away our rights and whatnot. The reality is that right now we have heat waves, we struggle globally on different issues. We have wildfires in Greece. We have seen the ones in Canada that have impacted us. I mean, I have pictures from New York City. I was in Spain at that time and in Thailand, but my colleagues in New York, from one day to the other, the wildfires in Canada, the smoke, how it covered all New York City in orange, and it was just dark in the middle of the day. Those are more frequent, and is not denying that. So is human cause? Well, there's reports. We, the UN, have no interest in scaring people to tell the world is ending. It's not ending, but we are damaging it. And should future generations really pay the price of the mistake of current generation? Should we do something? Can we prevent these drastic changes? So that's what we are trying to do, to collaborate with other entities so that we can really come up with solutions. So these SDGs are the goals that the UN is using until 2030. What happens in 2030? Maybe we'll extend this. We'll see where we are. Let's see how much we've been able to accomplish, and then and how we can work to make the planet a better place. I can tell you one thing. The example of LDS Charities is an important one. This is in 2015. In 2016, Latter-day Saint Charities already used in their annual report the SDGs as a reference for what they were doing. And they said the UN goals and Latter-day Saint Charities goals. So they compare them and they say, we are on track, we're doing this, and we're comparing. So this is a good reference point for many organizations, including faith-based, that want to do some good. HLPF, well, every year in July, we have the HLPF, the High-Level Political Forum, and we review the status of the SDGs. Okay, how are we doing? Are we really on track? Can we modify? Should we modify something? Can we change something that will be effective? Can we learn from each other? So can some countries, for example, Utah, you have a problem. You don't have water. You're losing, your lakes are drying out. And okay, so that drought and the lack of water and accessibility and the importance of water for crops and for daily living. Can you learn from any other region in the world that has gone through the same? Well, believe it or not, Somalia has also drought, and then some NGOs are working on the ground to find solutions, but also in Utah. So can we exchange ideas? Can we connect people from both sides and other regions of the world that are going through a drought? And can we come up with solutions that can be applicable to other spaces? And the idea is, maybe we can learn what's gone in Utah and apply solutions in Somalia. We have the funding and the resources. So, thank you. Yeah.
I'm sorry, but there is also a webpage that you can actually go by the nation, by the member states, and see their progress on the...
voluntary reports, I wouldn't trust, those are self-reporting. So yes, they exist. Oh, I'm being recorded. No, they're super good, the reports. Self-reporting mechanisms invite to questioning results and numbers. But the UN report from UNDP, the Development Program of the United Nations, the annual report is a much more accurate tool to see what is going on. Even the US at one point had a report by city, the most sustainable cities in the US. And Utah had 3 in the list, by the way. So good job. But yeah, self-reporting mechanisms are trustworthy to the point that you understand that are like self-reported, meaning, yeah, I'm doing great because I'm doing this, this, and that. How do I know? Because I promise we're doing it? I don't know. It's challenging, but yeah.
I was just wondering, how does the ethics and ideas of the religious institutions that are partnered with the UN affect the UN itself?
So what we do is we take them into consideration when developing programs and when partnering with people. We cannot impose ideas, and we definitely don't let ourselves be lectured by faith traditions. But religious traditions and faith-based organizations have been operating for thousands of years. We've been around for 77 years. There's plenty we can learn from those who have been doing a lot of good in the world. We talk about protection of the environment by our Hindu brothers and sisters. They're fantastic, and they have. I work with an NGO in Oxford that is a Hindu-based NGO that is advocating for the protection of the planet, taking care of animals and plants, and explaining how having sustainability mechanisms in the private sector is really beneficial, and how they have learned throughout history on the importance of this. So they inform us, and we can learn. At the same time, we must partner with key actors and players on the ground to do this. Let me use the example that I used yesterday. I show up in a country that is a Muslim country, Afghanistan. Let's do Afghanistan because it's the easy one. Post-conflict, very complicated situation. I, Felipe, show up in the mountains of Afghanistan, right, in a remote village. And I say, hi, I'm Felipe. I'm a communications officer of the United Nations. I have 17 goals. You're going to love them. They're fantastic. They're going to solve all your problems. We're going to eliminate poverty and hunger, and everything's going to be beautiful and pretty and dandy. The local matriarch of the group, the tribe, or the village will say, who are you again? Mr. UN? What happens? You're not one of us. You don't look like us, you don't speak like us, you don't worship like us, you don't eat like us, you don't dress like us, and you have solutions for us? Really? Because the UN has a plan? Good for you. Go back to New York, enjoy life, and let us deal with our issues here, because we know what we need and what we have. If I'm not that cocky, if I'm not that arrogant, and I don't pretend to have all the answers because I'm the UN, and I identify the local imam, and I sit down with him, in this case it's a man because it's in Afghanistan, and I said, okay, can we sit down for a meal, iftar or any other situation? Can we talk? Can I explain to you the connection that exists between the Holy Quran and the SDGs and Agenda 2030? Can I talk to you about what Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the teachings of the United Nations to sustainability are connected and how much we have in common? What do you think is going to happen the next Friday at the Friday prayer when he's teaching at the mosque to the community? They're going to listen to him better or worse than they listen to me? I'm the expert in theory on sustainability, right? It's about identifying the key player in the community. And in many, many, many cases, that key player is the faith actor, is a faith actor, a faith leader. So having a good relationship with them means also that before I go, I educate myself on Islam, and I educate myself on the principles that they live by and the importance that they give to different principles on sustainability and property, and certain language that I can use. I talk about it when I come to Utah, and I talk to any faith leader that is, or I go to a conservative state in the United States. I need to be mindful that climate change has been politicized. Okay, so I talk about the environmental responsibility or stewardship that the scriptures talk about and that I can really explain. Of course, we believe in that. Yeah, we are on board. We even have a program on sustainability. Well, we don't call it sustainability, it's just self-reliance, but you see, but it's just, they are key players in our understanding, and they've been around for a long, long time. Why eliminating? Sometimes I get challenged by atheist or humanist groups. We also work with them, by the way, at the same level. But sometimes some of them, when they start working with the UN and they really don't know the groups, they say, why engaging with religions? I mean, they're the cause of conflict and discrimination, and what about the LGBTQI community because they feel threatened? What happens with all that? And I always say the same thing. If you focus on the negative, you will always find negative in every place. If you focus on the commonalities that we have, and the common ground that we have, and the good principles that we have, for many people doing good is a moral imperative. For them, it's a religious principle. Why eliminating from the equation the main reason they do good? We can just use it. We can work together. We can find common ground. I know, we work with Islamic Relief, and Islamic Relief has very strong principles in certain regions, or Islam has strong principles on women's rights in certain countries. Okay, that's the reality. We can do two things. We can say, you're bad. You're really discriminatory, and this should not be happening, and you're, I don't know, you're going to burn, or what, I don't know, whatever the UN can say on this thing. Makes no sense. Okay, we can sit down and explain certain principles. How about we work on this? And this remote village, and this other country that happens to be also an Islamic republic or Islamic state, we happen to work with them very well. And hey, why don't you talk with each other and learn that, or can we do something for you? I cannot just go to a country and say, these are the principles you need to live by, because we have proven them in the US or in Spain. So it makes no sense. We must invite ourselves to say, okay, how can we help you? What do you need from us? And how can we contribute to the betterment of your society? And in many, many cases, faith-based organizations are the leaders in those changes. So that's why we work with them. And they're very important in what we do.
I'll ask one.
Thank you.
Do you
so
think
lonely here when people don't ask questions.
Yeah. Do you think that it's important that the UN does not have or use military power? Would that be contradictory to the agenda of the Sustainable Development Goals, or counterproductive? Or do you think that in some other situation it could all be helpful? Or
it would go against our own principles and mandate. We were not created or designed to have a military power. We have peacekeepers or peacekeeping operations and peace operations that we do. I was talking about that yesterday. We have peacemaking, peace building, peacekeeping, and peace enforcing. The peace enforcing mechanism only exists after the Brahimi report of 2000, and then in 2013, it was the first time that in MONUSCO, one of the missions that we have for peacekeeping, we determined through the resolution, the member states determined at the Security Council that force needed to be used to ensure peace. It's an oxymoron. It had never happened before. And it was very calculated. And it was a consensus internationally to do that because it was the only mechanism to protect the rights of people. But the UN is not a government. It's not a law enforcement entity. It's a convening diplomatic organization that we bring people together to talk and find solutions. If some of the solutions require military intervention, through sanctions or resolutions of the Security Council, for example, then NATO may intervene if, it happened in Libya, for example. And but those are very rare. That's the Security Council specifically. The mandate of the UN is not to have a military and as I said, how do you fight ideas with bullets or bombs? Can you say, well, I'm going to bomb the idea of violent extremism or white supremacism or discrimination against women? A bomb and a bullet will solve it. Makes no sense. So we have found different mechanisms, diplomatic mechanisms, communication mechanisms, and information, of course. But diplomacy, communication, education is really the mechanism that the UN uses for the most part, and it works. I don't know how long we have, by the way. Where's it? Oh, there. 21 minutes in silence? Oh, thank you.
What does the United Nations do when a particular member of the United Nations, like any other country, oppresses somebody within their own community? How can the UN take action against its own, say, even founding members? Because I know there are two specific groups within China, the Tibetans that are being oppressed by China, but how does the UN get involved with that?
And thank you for the question. It's a very complex matter because the UN respects the principle of sovereignty, meaning what happens in a country must be dealt domestically. When there's a violation of human rights, then we have reports to the Human Rights Council through the communications mechanism, and then it can be investigated, and then we can have reports. We did that with Syria when Bashar al-Assad used chemical weapons against the population, and the UN presented the findings of the report, and the US went to the Security Council, and Samantha Power, one of my heroes diplomatically in the US, told the member states involved, are you incapable of shame for what you're doing? Publicly. You can watch the video. Are you incapable of saying that what you're doing is just inhumane? What is going through your mind? So we have those challenges, but the problem is that the UN cannot invade a country. It took us 3 days to get really organized in Haiti after the earthquake because we had to be invited to operate in the country. We could have help in Morocco if they had asked for help from the United Nations. Hey, after the earthquake, Libya, we have operations in Libya already, and with the flooding that just happened and so on. So unless we are invited to a country, and of course when the government is the one that is oppressing, when the government is the one committing crimes against its own population or certain populations, be it in different regions of the world. China is not exclusive, and many things are happening all over the world with many countries. But when you have a member state that is misbehaving internally, or that is perceived to be misbehaving internally, then the UN can then put some political pressure, there can be some sanctions, there can be some resolutions condemning and so on, but the UN was not designed to police the world. There are other mechanisms. We have the International Court of Justice for disputes, but also the Criminal Court that can handle genocide and different crimes against humanity. Is because we were not designed for that. People expect us to solve those problems. And well, what is the UN doing on this? We're trying to educate and cooperate and find out the information firsthand. And then let's see if we can just have different mechanisms. We can have observers, we can have rapporteurs, we can really send envoys to see what's going on, and then report, and then at the General Assembly, Security Council, inform, this is going on in this country, what can we do to protect the rights of certain minorities? That's when refugee agencies step in, and if people have to flee the country, then they're protected through those mechanisms. Or political asylum by the member states. That's what this international legislation, that through different mechanisms and instruments that we have, we can provide political asylum if someone is being persecuted because of the religious ideas or the sexual orientation. For example, it happens a lot in many countries. What happens when someone who identifies as gay is persecuted, imprisoned, and even executed because of their sexual orientation? The UN has been very clear. LGBTQI rights are human rights. No question, so they have to be protected. If a member state is violating that against the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, then we can have different instruments to protect if they flee. And internally, we work with civil society organizations or NGOs that can provide protection, and then passage maybe somewhere else. But it's a very complex matter when you have a country that is sovereign over what happens within the boundaries of the country. And we can, as I said, we were not designed to police the world or to go after or invade countries because they're misbehaving. Okay. Wow, 2 at the same time. Unbelievable.
Sorry, this is a little bit of a long question, but I met a lot of refugees who were from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, who had escaped the conflict there, and they had a lot of very negative things to say about the UN. Specifically, they talked about how since there were the peacekeepers there, and some militia group invaded the city of Goma, I think it was, where the UN peacekeepers were, and the peacekeepers didn't do anything about it, and they were, all of these people who had fled were super upset about that. They expected the UN to be there to, kind of prevent that from happening. So I'm kind of curious, just generally, what is what exactly is a peacekeeping mission? What's the role of the UN in those kinds of situations? Should they be expecting that kind of intervention?
Thank you. And so the four aspects of peace, peacemaking, peace building, peacekeeping, and peace enforcing, are different levels of engagement depending on the situation. We talked about that yesterday in Professor's class on peace and justice. Basically, a peacekeeping mission is a post-conflict situation where we try to prevent that escalation of conflict arises again, or war arises again, and the population is protected. Engaging is against the mandate of peacekeeping operations. The next level, and it happened in MONUSCO, the mission for Congo in 2013, is when the Security Council realized this is not enough because we need to intervene actively. That's peace enforcing. Very rare. The UN, we don't talk much about it because it's not, doesn't happen often. MONUSCO is still one of those active situations where the mandate has been extended. What do you do? The mandate of the peacekeeper is, first of all, they don't belong to, they are peacekeepers of different countries, so donations from, or people who are on loan from the member states to support certain missions with resolutions of the Security Council. When those things happen, and they have happened a lot, or when the peacekeepers misbehave themselves, sometimes they have been accused of rape and abuse and human trafficking themselves. It has happened in the past, unfortunately. We have learned from those mistakes. We have revamped our process for filtering and monitoring and who is doing what. The Human Rights Council and the Office for the High Commissioner for Human Rights monitors those situations also. And also the Peace and Political Affairs Operations offices, they also monitor the situation with reports with internal auditors and so on. When that kind of misbehavior happens, all we can do is, well, correct the situation, remove, and replace. When the missions are, like peacekeeping missions, are still active, then we monitor the situation and we say, okay, what can we do if something happens, like a rebel or militia comes and then starts attacking? Because the UN has dictated that peacekeeping operations, you can only shoot when you're shot upon. And if you know that conflict is coming, you need to remove yourself because you're not part of the conflict. You are a force to ensure that conflict doesn't arise again. But if it escalates to the point of conflict again, it's a failure in the sense of the mission, of course, but it's nothing that we can enforce. Again, we cannot force people to do anything. You can bring the horse to water, but you're going to make the horse drink. In many cases, the problem is that the peacekeeping missions are very limited in the mandate and the legal scope of their operation. And people expect so much more from the UN. So, listen, I'm a displaced person. I'm living away from my village or from my city or my town or my country. I need to be protected by these people who are supposed to be peacekeepers and keeping the peace. But what happens with conflict arises again, unless the specific mandate by the Security Council on peace enforcing, which they can actively engage to remedy a situation, it's a complex situation, as I said. And peace enforcing, what the Brahimi report said and what the resolution in 2013 by the Security Council said is that you don't need permission by the local authorities to engage because those are international military forces under the UN flag, but it's international military forces. You have to be very careful how you operate within the boundaries of a country. In those cases where the UN determines that, or the member states of the UN determine that peace enforcing is necessary, is when then they can take action without permission from the national government. Those are very rare, but they happen, and MONUSCO is one of those examples that has happened. Is it perfect? No. Because coordinating something like that, coordinating a military structure that was not designed for intervention or enforcement, but it was really designed for peacekeeping, is a complex. And you need leadership that is really aware of the ground, knows the culture, knows the reality, and can really make decisions that will impact. But no matter what, we will always have critics that say, well, and particularly the victims, and I'm 100%, and I agree. It's like, but it's not the mandate of the UN. Other mechanisms should be created, perhaps internationally, that could be more effective in those cases.
Comparatively from the beginning of your career to where you are right now, with religious organizations and how they interact with the UN, have you seen a general trend of more involvement in trying to accomplish the SDGs, less involvement, or about the same amount of involvement?
Much more, and they keep demanding more and more. Faith-based organization wants to be more, they want to be more involved with the UN. We call it the civic space at the UN, and it keeps expanding. And member states, some countries don't like it. Some countries, they don't want to engage with NGOs or CSOs or FBOs, we call them, faith-based organizations. And we have a challenge there, because by definition, they're part of the UN Charter says we the peoples, right? Not we the governments of the peoples, not we the leaders of the world, is we the peoples. It's a challenge, but more and more faith-based organizations and civil society organizations, they want to be included and they advocate and they push. Last year, we processed the application of my colleagues in NGLS, the non-government liaison service, for high-level meetings for participation has gone from, I think it's like 4,000 the previous year to 11,000 last year. More actively in the room, present. Imagine all those that follow online and whatnot. They want their voices to be heard, and they have plenty to say, and really good ideas, but not always member states like them. So, and some member states consider some groups terrorist groups. So they said, no, you cannot participate because you are leading a movement against the government to change things. Well, if you're killing people and you're violating human rights, you should be pointed out and denounced. So that's one of the challenges. And then the other is the language in the resolutions. Are the resolutions really inviting for civil society participation or faith-based participation? Religious traditions want to have a say, religious traditions want to participate. They're very active. As I said, 60% of the active CSOs we work with are faith-based, and they have really, really good content. Some member states love it. The US, Spain, the northern countries in Europe, they love participation of civil society organizations. They invite them and they bring them as formal delegations, and they can have part of the discussion, but it's not always the case. But slowly they want more, and they are key actors to implement Agenda 2030 and the SDGs. Without them, it would be impossible to achieve the goals.
I'll have another question for you. So when I read up there on the SDG 16, where it says strong institutions, how does the UN determine what the ideal looks like for these in order to measure them? Because that seems kind of vague to me, and I you know, it's such a large scale globally, so many sovereign nations. So, like, how do you know what strong institutions looks like?
Strong institution, depending on the sector you belong to. An NGO, a strong NGO, has a specific mandate. It's a nonprofit, tax exempt, that has a social good. A corporation, I'm not going to name any, but a big food or drink company, Coca-Cola, Starbucks, their purpose is to make money. They're private sector, and that's perfectly fine. But are they living up to certain standards? Are they respecting human rights? Are they sustainable? Are they environmentally friendly? Are they mindful of the rights, labor rights of their... Strong institutions are those that follow the rules for the benefit of the community, but also society and also the employees. That's why ILO, the International Labour Organization, monitors the situation of certain companies. If Nike wants to have a new model, or if Adidas, I mean, you know, I can mention all of them. But if one company wants to improve the conditions, then they can check with the SDG Impact. SDG Impact is an initiative of the UNDP, United Nations Development Program, that has certain standards for the private sector, for foundations, nonprofits, where they tell you, okay, these are principles that you should live by. And most of them are respect for human rights, diversity, inclusion, the standards, the normal ones. Those are strong institutions. Public institutions, government institutions, are the ones that do not discriminate based on religion or ethnicity, or ones that take into consideration the different factors and favor certain minorities that have been discriminated before, so that they can take advantage of certain benefits so that they can catch up with the rest of the population. So depending on what sector you come from, in academia, administration, we have in the US this debate on affirmative action and how should we really favor certain communities against others because of traditionally or historically. Those are, when you take into consideration all those factors and you really look into how to benefit all communities and everyone equally, then is when you have a strong institution. But remember, it's peace, justice, and strong institutions, because it goes together. Because you cannot have a stable and a peaceful community without institutions that really back it up. And for the most part, peace is only obtained once you have the involvement of the local institutions, the municipal one, and then you scale up all the way to the national institutions that can protect through legislation and international mechanisms. Thank you.
How does one start working for or with the UN? Like, how did you get your start with working with the UN?
Thank you. By accident. I had no clue what the UN... I knew what the UN was. It's there in New York, and they have peacekeepers, and they help poor countries in Africa and Asia. That's all I know about the UN. When I was at BYU, Idaho, I needed an internship to graduate. It's one of the conditions for the political science degree. So I needed an internship. I had a friend who had done the internship, and I applied. And I was rejected. And I like to tell the story because it's real funny. I submitted my application and thought, for sure I'm a really good candidate because I speak Spanish, I kind of speak English. I'm not that stupid, so I mean, something I can do. I'm sure that I can just make coffee for someone and just make copies. And I was rejected. So I figured out the phone number for the recruiter at the UN, and I call her. Her name is Isolda Oca from the Philippines. She's already retired. She became my boss later on. And I call her, and I ask why. Why haven't I been rejected? Well, you know, maybe a couple of students from your university. One of them didn't show up. The other one left early. So we decided no one else from BYU, Idaho. And I said, well, but I also studied at St. Louis University in Madrid, so can I change? 45 minutes later, I had convinced her to hire me. I said, well, I'm free, you know, I had to pay me. You can fire me in 2 weeks if I'm not what you expect, if I don't deliver. And it was a 6-month unpaid internship, July through December. And 3 months into the internship, they said, would you like to work for us after your internship? I guess I was not that bad. And I don't know, the decision was very hard, like unemployment versus working for the UN, so tough choice. I said yes, of course. Went back to BYU Idaho, worked a little bit for them remotely, before remote work was really a thing. And then moved to New York in July of that year, 2009, to work for the UN. Been there for 15 years. Best decision ever. I love the UN, and each day I'm more in love with the work that I do and the people that I work with and the activities that I get to engage with. The UN is a place for service. I was saying this yesterday to the classroom. If you're looking for money, don't come to the UN. We are not getting paid well. We have great benefits, and we have a great environment to work, very international. If you like international environment where you do service for others and you really focus on making sure that people are happier, the UN is for you. If not, go and work for doTERRA, or I don't know, one of those that you have here that are like super big, or Newskin, I mean, any of those companies, or for Google or Facebook. I mean, if you want to make money, create your own company. You can also create. The UN is not for everyone. You need to be mindful that we are very bureaucratic. So sometimes it gets awfully, horribly exasperating when you're dealing with something and you don't see the results immediately. And if you're very impatient, then the UN is not for you. You need to be patient, you need to be very understanding, and knowing that you're part of a governmental structure or intergovernmental structure that has its flaws. I studied political science and theology in Spain, but we welcome anyone from any background. We have doctors, photographers, architects, nurses, engineers, journalists, anyone really can work for the UN system because we have many fields where we collaborate. And it's very competitive, it's very tough. Baldomero always reminds me, tell them that it's very hard to get into the UN. It's very hard to get into the UN, that's true. But if they hire me, trust me, anyone can get in because I'm nothing special. I have passion, that's it. If you're passionate about something, if you love what you do, and you really want to make a difference, then the UN is your place. But an NGO is also your place. Or foreign service can be also your place if you like diplomacy. Or Doctors Without Borders, if you want many places to do good, and make good decisions and do good things. The UN what the UN has is the name and reputation of is the convener of good people that we can do good things. Yes, we made mistakes, as I said, but it's really a good career and it's a really rewarding one. When I get to sleep at night, when I have enough time to sleep, I sleep very well because I always think, we did some good in the world today. We really did. And we made mistakes, yeah, but overall, in the balance and scheme of things, we really made a difference for some people. And as a member of the church, also the LDS Church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, it's a perfect balance for me. It's a perfect job because I get to do service ecclesiastically in my private life and also do service professionally. And I'm a much, much better UN employee because of my faith tradition, and I'm a much better member of the church because of my employment at the UN, because they feed each other, and I learn about diversity and inclusion and the beauty of multiculturalism, for example. So I landed by accident, but I think that it was the universe, karma, whatever it is, that scheme of things that decided that point me in the right direction to land in the right place at the right time to do the right thing. And I think that I'm enjoying it. I received my papers for retirement because the UN is very quick and say, okay, you're going to threaten to say. So they send me my paperwork and I will retire on the 30th of April of 2046. I think that they're still regretting hiring me because I'm a troublemaker. So they say, we cannot wait until you leave. This is your date of departure, okay? Enjoy. And if you want to leave early, you can leave early. Don't worry, we can just make it happen. But I'm not going anywhere, not anytime soon, because I love what I do. And it's fun. And I travel. Valdemar said I travel. This year I was in Thailand, in Qatar. Qatar's a beautiful country, by the way. I was not expecting how amazing it was. Malaysia, I go to Korea, I mean, you name it, tons of places. And also I go next door to Utah and New York, or upstate New York and Buffalo also. I work with many universities also. I'm an honorary professor of community and criminal justice at De Montfort University in the United Kingdom. And it's a lot of fun to engage. And when you get to work with good people around you is very motivational. So if you want to do service, if you want to really have a career to serve others and make the world a better place, sounds very cheesy, but it's true, then join the UN. But it's very tough. The year that I took the exam, I always give the numbers. In 2015, when I took the exam to move from general service or assistant to professional service or officer like I am right now, 46,000 people applied to the exam globally. Of those 46,000 people, 6,000 people were told, yes, you can take the exam. 40,000 people were told, sorry, too many people applying, try next year. Of those 6,000 people, 11 of us went through to the Department of Global Communications. So ratio is tough. It was my 5th attempt. I had taken the exam 4 times before. And by the 5th time I learned, I need to be creative, I need to be innovative, I need to be different than any other candidate. So instead of saying the answers that were on the website, I just came up with my own answers based on my own experience. Seems like it worked out. I don't know if it worked out, or there's, you know what, 5 times? Okay, just go through. We're done with you. Just okay, it's all yours. Come and stop bothering us. But I'm happy where I am, and I love it. Oh, wow.
Thank you. That's a wonderful way to end a great session. I want to thank Baldemaro for sharing Felipe's time with Ethics Awareness Week. Felipe, thank you for a wonderful presentation and Q&A. We hope to see you for other events during Ethics Awareness Week, and I just want to remind you that there is the survey form. The QR code is all over the room. So please join me in thanking Felipe. Have a great rest of your day.